how to avoid the heat while traveling in an RV with pets. I'm gonna give you my top 5 tips that I've picked up us living full-time in our Airstream while traveling the country. Welcome to the channel. I live full-time in this Airstream with my 2 German Shepherds, Enzo and Lotus, and 1 very opinionated rally cat. Typically, I like to stay in locations at least a week, but as we were traveling up the coast of California, we were moving locations almost every single night. As there's few locations for dispersed camping along that journey, I had to get a little creative with keeping myself and most importantly the pups and rally cool during the day. So here's my top 5 tips for staying cool when the heat starts to rise. Alright, the first tip is location, location, location. Whether you apparently buy a house or live in an Airstream, apparently that never changes. So far, my favorite location is the Pacific Coast. Now, if you didn't grow up near the Pacific Coast, you may not know this. As somebody who's been to the ocean on the East Coast a few times, whether in New York, Myrtle Beach, Florida, mid-June, July, it's hot. Doesn't matter. That is not the case on the West Coast. If you can get close enough to the ocean, pretty much anywhere on the West Coast can be nice and cool because you have that air coming off the ocean that is nice and cool. Now, obviously these places can have warm days, sure, but you will generally have that airflow coming off the ocean, cooling things down, which is gonna make a huge difference. My second favorite is our current location. Now, it doesn't have to be this specific location. We are filming this in Utah. We're in the, I'm not even gonna try to say it, I'll say it wrong. Unita? I don't know. We're in the National Forest. Salt Lake City, when we left yesterday, it was 95 degrees. Salt Lake City is about 4,000 feet. We came up to Park City, which is about 6,000 feet, low 80s, high 70s. But then we came up into the National Forest. We are currently at 9,000 feet, and when we arrived, we were down to 68 degrees. 68 degrees, where not very far away is 95 degrees in Salt Lake City. Now, keep in mind that while higher elevations are going to be beneficial, it is hard to get up to 9,000. We do have shade. We are surrounded by trees. Now, I know if you're looking out here, we have nothing but open spaces, which is beautiful, but actually everything on this side, and behind us is all trees. Maybe I'll show a photo or something. But we are surrounded by trees, so we do actually have shade, although to be honest, it's not really necessary this high up. Sunscreen is important, side note, but having shade for the Airstream this high up isn't that important. Now, obviously, not everybody can be on the Pacific Coast. Not everybody can be up in the mountains. So in those instances, what I try to do is we spend our days in shade and we spend our nights wherever we need to be. So for the last few weeks, we had been traveling up the coast from LA to San Francisco. And while most of the time we were right on the ocean, there were a few instances where we had to go a little bit further inland and it could get significantly warmer. So what we did in those days is we would go to a park. Google Satellite can be super helpful for this. Find a park that has a good amount of shade. We'd get there pretty early, set up somewhere, like not really set up, just park. We basically spend all day at the park until sunset. Another option is if you're near state or national parks or forests that allow dogs, you could go in there. Oftentimes they're going to charge you a small fee. Usually it's about $10, but we did that when we were coming towards Utah from California. We stayed at Donner Memorial Park. They allow dogs. We got a day pass. It was $10. All the trees plus the little bit higher elevation was certainly welcomed. It was a nice cool day. So that is the first tip, location. It is the most important. If you can get that right, the rest will kind of fall into place. Number 2, consider which way you park. If you don't have shade as an option, then what I've learned is this end of the Airstream needs to face east. The first time I knew I wasn't going to have shade and thought it might be a little bit warm, we were in New Mexico, Silver City. We're starting to get a couple warm days towards the end of our stay. I thought it was wise to face sunset because as the sun comes up early in the morning and all day, this side would stay cool and then we'd just get it in the evening. The problem is it gets hotter as the day goes, so it ended up kind of backfiring on me. So I've learned since then to always face east. So like when we're in the Alabama Hills, you'll notice that I'm always facing east. Another ATV or something? Lots of ATVs. It's July 4th weekend coming up basically. My third tip is if you are driving frequently, like how we were for the last few weeks, choose at what point of the day to drive. Now, ideally, I liked to drive in the morning, even though it is cooler in the morning. That way we could get to whatever destination we're going to early. find a good suitable park before they get busy. That way we could get our choice of shady spots. And then we'd spend all day there until sunset. And then we'd go to our campsite, which wouldn't typically be that far away. When we crossed Nevada, I knew it was not going to have any shade or anything. It was just going to be miserable. So we got up super early. We went to a park, spent a couple hours there, plenty of exercise when it was nice and cool in Reno that morning. Then we got in the car and we drove through that peak hours. We ended up driving through all those sun hours. They were passed out in the back. They were so tired. And then we pulled into Utah shortly before sunset, where the temperatures were already starting to drop again. And then we were able to, again, go out for a few hours, get plenty of exercise. So honestly, they probably had more exercise that day and were calmer during the drive than they've ever been, because I was prepared for it. I knew what we were getting ourselves into, and it worked out well. So when all else fails, just drive during the worst part of the day if you have to.
Oh my goodness, Pop, it's so cold in this little cocoon.
My fourth tip is the Zero Breeze. Now, if you're not familiar with the Zero Breeze, I did a GoFundMe for this when we got stuck in Arizona for several days and the heat was just too much. You all who watch and subscribe and everything were generous enough to donate so the pups could have one. This works great because it only uses about 250 watts, which means I can run it off solar. I can easily run off my batteries for several hours. When we were in places where the shade wasn't the best over the last few weeks, I could run that as a supplement for them and keep them nice and cool. And my fifth and final tip is a last resort that thankfully we haven't had to do yet, but that is, if all else failed, I was willing to get a hotel room. For the first time, I really considered it in Nevada because I had looked at all the data, all the campsites, everything, and there was just nothing between Reno and Utah. So I was actually considering a hotel. Side note, you could also like do Airbnb or something. Pick a place that actually allows dogs, allows pets, and has air conditioning. So those are my 5 tips for staying cool while traveling, specifically with pets. Now, ideally, you want to stay in that 70-degree range of temperature, but we know that's not always possible. Most of the country right now, except for the locations I mentioned, are not in that 70-degree weather. So you got to get a little creative. I hope this video helped you. If you have suggestions, I would love to hear them, because this journey is far from over. We still have a lot of summer left, a lot of warm months, and as I've learned through most of my life, it kind of comes back every year. So we'll need to know it for the future. So if you've got any cool tips, definitely leave them below. Otherwise, I appreciate you guys as always. Please consider subscribing if you're not subscribing, so that way you can follow along with our journey. To everybody who likes, who watches, who follows along, I appreciate you all so much, and especially the Patreons who support us each and every month with their donations. I love you all. Good night. The first tip is, if you'd like to follow us along, who literally support us each and every month with their... Lotus, could you not lick the blanket?